All right, good evening, everyone. Let's begin. So Baruch Hashem, we begin by thanking all of our sponsors for tonight's shir. To thank, first of all, our Talmud Torah sponsors, which is the families who dedicate all the shiurim and drashos for the particular month. Baruch Meir and Rina Dubin, in honor of our children and all of the sons and daughters of our Kehillah beginning their year of study in Eretz Yisrael. May their Torah study and mitzvos in the Holy Land merit the release of our precious hostages, the success of our soldiers, the return to their families, and the arrival of Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mehera b'yameinu. Amen. To thank our shir sponsor for tonight, Jacob and Chana Miriam Altshuler, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Chana Miriam's mother, Naomi Amelia Bas Yecheskel Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. So what I'd like to do, Emirat Hashem, over the course of our next 2 weeks, we have this week, next week, this Monday, next Monday, and then Emirat Hashem, Tuesday, this Tuesday, next Tuesday, and then Emirat Hashem, one more Tuesday, right? Yeah. And then the last Tuesday is our pre-Yamim Noraim shir. What I'd like to try to do, Emirat Hashem, really for the next 2 shiurim, so this week and next week, is focus a little bit on the essence of Chodesh Elul. And what it is that we're supposed to be focusing on, what it is that we're supposed to be kind of taking out of this incredibly beautiful, magnificent, holy, and dramatic month. So we'll develop one approach for this week, and Amir Hashem will develop a different approach, God willing, for next week as well. So let's begin with number 1. First, I want to share with you an interesting statement from the Mariel. So the Mariel says as follows. He says, Yesh Omrim, She'in lahosif mechal ala kodesh b'Rosh Hashanah. So this is very interesting. A little bit of background. We generally have a concept of mosifin mechal ala kodesh, which means we always add on from the weekday onto the holy. So for example, we know we have the concept of starting Shabbos early. We kind of have this built in a little bit, right? Because we light candles 18 minutes before Shabbos, contrary to popular opinion. You are not supposed to use those 18 minutes. The goal is to be ready for Shabbos long before the 18 minutes. The 18 minutes is only there, God forbid, in the event of emergency. But no, all kidding aside, it's a new year, new beginnings. Ein adoma a Shabbos that you're able to go into benachos with quiet and tranquility than a Shabbos that rushes in. I know what you're thinking. What a man thing to say, right? Of course, he's got a wife, he comes home, he does this. Okay, you're right, it's absolutely true, Baruch Hashem. But that being said, like most things in life, with enough forethought and enough planning, you could accomplish almost anything. In any event, so we have a concept that we start Shabbos early in order to add on from the weekday onto Shabbos, just like we have the concept that we end Shabbos later in an effort to prolong Shabbos. And we find this all the time. We find this by Shabbos, we find it by Yom Tiv. There's always the concept of adding on from the weekday onto the holy. So this is incredible. The Maril says, we do this all the time, but not on Rosh Hashanah. And not on Rosh Hashanah. The Mariel says we don't start Rosh Hashanah early, and we don't light candles early, and we don't go ahead and end Rosh Hashanah late. Why not? He says, Mishum diyoma dedinuhu. Because Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment. Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment. And because it's a day of judgment, there is, this is not our topic for today. We'll speak about this in a couple of weeks. Rosh Hashanah is the greatest anomaly. Right? Is Rosh Hashanah a day of simcha, or is it a day of pachad, a day of fear? Which one is it? Right? It's this strange anomaly, this strange dichotomy. That on one hand, Rosh Hashanah is an incredible day. It's a Yom Tiv. That's why, again, we don't fast. We go home, we have celebratory meals. On the other hand, we also recognize that literally life and death is being decided. So the Maril says that because Rosh Hashanah is the Yom Adin, because Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment, so therefore, again, we have no interest in prolonging judgment. So Rosh Hashanah starts when it starts, and it ends when it ends. Now it happens to be halacha l'maisa, practically speaking, we treat Rosh Hashanah like every other Yom Tiv, and we do start it early, and we do end it later. But conceptually, it is fascinating that the Maril says Rosh Hashanah is 2 days, it begins when it begins, it ends when it ends, and you don't start it any earlier, and you don't end it any later. Why am I sharing this with you? Because often when it comes to Chodesh Elul, we often look at Elul as the beginning of Rosh Hashanah. Right? What is Elul? Elul is a month which precedes Rosh Hashanah in order to get us into the mindset for Rosh Hashanah. It's almost like a prolonged Rosh Hashanah. Becomes the Mariel, and the Mariel says, we don't do that. We don't prolong Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is a 1 day, which, okay, halachically now became 2 days, which is really like 1 day, but we're not going to get into that now, right? But Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Hashanah. You have Rosh Hashanah. You have that day of judgment. But that's not Elul. Don't bring Rosh Hashanah in any earlier. Don't keep it any later. It's a contained day of judgment. We have no interest in prolonging judgment, which means Elul is not the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, which means that Elul isn't even the beginning of the Yamim Noraim. It's not the beginning of Aseret Yemei Tshuva. Elul is its own entity. So if Elul is not the beginning, which also means that perhaps Elul is not even the beginning of the season of Tshuva, which sounds strange, right? Because the entire essence of Yamim Noraim, of Aseret Yemei Tshuva, is Tshuva. Tshuva, utfila, utzedaka, ma'avir nesrag. We say in the Sana Tokef. It's all about Tshuva. It's all about tefillah. So if Elul's not Rosh Hashanah, Elul's not Yamim Noraim, then what is Elul? So I'll show you something beautiful. So in Kutei Torah, so the Rebbe writes in number 2, Yemei Elul, Hem Yemei Rachamim. Elul is something different. Elul is not judgment. See, Rosh Hashanah is judgment. Rosh Hashanah is, you could wrap it in simcha and you could wrap it in excitement, but Rosh Hashanah in and of itself has a profound severity. Now, it's a joyful severity because we're being judged by someone who loves us, but it's a severity nevertheless. That's why, again, we know, Shachris, on Rosh Hashanah morning, we do something very interesting. The Chazan begins Shachris with the word Hamelech, the king. And we know the minhag is in most kehilos that the Chazan says Hamelech, not from the bima, not from the amud, but rather, again, from his seat. There's this feeling of smallness. There's this feeling of fear. There's this feeling of inadequacy about my ability to come before the king. I don't want to be judged. I'm not ready to be judged. I'm not prepared to be judged. And to be honest, no matter how much I use my Elul, no matter how much I use my year, most of us are never really prepared to be judged. So at the end of the day, so therefore, that's Rosh Hashanah, judgment Rosh Hashanah. What's Elul? Yemei Elul hem Yemei Rachamim. Because the Lubavitcher Rebbe says that ultimately Elul, these are days of compassion, days of divine compassion. Now, what does this mean? The Lubavitcher Rebbe had one of his most famous sichos, one of those most famous shiurim that he gave was a sicha, a discourse titled Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li, which I'm to my beloved is for me, which is the famous acronym of Elul. And in it, the Rebbe describes the power of Chodesh Elul. So take a look at number 3. It's also, this essay becomes known as Hamelech Basada. The king is in the field. So again, what I've quoted for you over here in number 3 is a little bit of it's not even an excerpt, it's kind of like a summary of it. So look what he writes. So the Rebbe gave this mashal, and it's quite beautiful. There was once a great king, a wise king, who reigned over many lands. And he was a good king. He was a good king. A king who was always concerned about his constituents. A king who was always looking out for his subjects. Always looking for ways to improve their lives. Melech zeh piercing pam kruz bonemar ki kol ezrach sheish lo bakasha kolshi rashay lavay lavla armona b'chol ishir. So one time the king, who loved his subjects so much, he made an announcement. What was the announcement? Chevra, whoever wants to come to the palace and ask whatever they need to ask of me is invited to come. Incredible. He threw the palace doors wide open. Whoever wants to come and see me, ask whatever they want to come. Second paragraph. This is incredible. Ulam, ha'ezrachim lo hirbu lavo la'armon hamelech, v'hamelech yispalei al kach ma'od. The people didn't come. People didn't come. The subjects didn't show up to the palace. La'achar mikan, haven, ki im kol hakalos, ki im kol hakalos, v'adayin lo kol kach kal, libnei adam ha'pashot la'gia elav, milvad zos, Rov ha'am gorim michutz la'ir abira v'kashal li'agia b'la'armon l'shtach b'fnei hamelech, as the Kashal saying. The king realized, why was no one coming? So really 2 reasons. Number one, people were intimidated to come to the palace. Even though the king made a genuine invitation, people were intimidated. That was one chavra, one group. Furthermore, another group lived out of town. So the out-of-town chavra was too far for them to travel. The in-town chavra were still a little bit intimidated. Third paragraph. So when the king realized what was going on, he said, okay, I'm going to go out to the people. So I tried to do something magnanimous by throwing open the palace doors and letting the people come to me. They're not coming. Instead, I'm going to go to the people. So what happens? The king Mamish went from city to city, village to village. Fourth paragraph. So incredible. Everywhere the king went, the people were overwhelmed. The king, this incredible, famous, powerful king who ruled over so many countries and provinces, was now knocking on doors, stopping in people's dining rooms, saying a shalom aleichem. And he was so accessible, and he was so friendly. And he left the confines of the palace, and the people felt that they could ask of him anything. So it goes on in the fifth paragraph. Me'az nahag hamelech lasos kain midei shana b'shana. The trip out of the palace into the provinces was so successful that the king said, you know what? I have to do this once a year. Because as much as the palace doors are open and they're accessible to everyone, some people are too intimidated to come to the king, and some people simply live too far. But I realize that if I leave the palace and I come to the people will appreciate and take advantage of the opportunity so much. And therefore again, so the Rebbe writes over here, for 40 days out of the year, so what happened? The king decided to close up the palace, and instead he went on a tour of his constituents. He went, of course, with his monarchical trappings, but he was accessible to everyone, and everyone had the opportunity to engage the king. So the Rebbe writes, Arboim hayomim shebein rosh chodesh Elul va'ad achar yom kippurim heim hayomim hamat'imim biyoser bahem yochol Yehudi la'agia l'melech malchei hamlachim. So we're going to focus now on Elul more than anything else. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains so beautifully that what is the month of Elul? The month of Elul is the month that the king leaves the palace and he comes to us. The whole rest of the year, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, the palace doors are open. Come to me, talk to me, be with me whenever you want. But what's the reality? The reality is that a lot of us are intimidated to go to the king. And a lot of us are too far, not geographically, but spiritually, to make the journey to the king. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you know what? This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. You know, I've often thought, like, to give like a marinade, you know, you hear this sometimes like in Shidduchim, that it really gets me a little bit. That like when boys, much more by young men than it is by girls, who won't go out with a girl because they have to travel. Yeah, and what? In other words, if you care about someone, even if you don't know the person yet, but you care about, you get in the car and you go, you travel. The interesting part is apparently this is not a new dynamic. This has been the downfall of mankind throughout history. That even though there are opportunities, we're just too lazy to make the trip. Now the good news is that the Ribono Shel Olam sees that sometimes we don't want to go out of town, right? I don't want to go out of town. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us so much that what does he do? He comes to us. And says the Rebbe calls this Hamelech Basodeh. The king is in the field. The entire year the Ribono Shel Olam is in his palace. And again, I want to be clear. Even when HaKadosh Baruch Hu sits in his palace, the palace is always open. If we only realized how badly HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to come home, and how badly HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to come to the palace, and how much he desires a relationship with us. But for whatever the reason, we're too busy, we're too preoccupied, we're too self-conscious, we're too nervous, whatever it might be, right? We're too estranged. Many of us don't go to the palace. And Chodesh Elul, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this is ridiculous. If you're not coming to me, I'm coming to you. And herein lies the power and profundity of Chodesh Elul. This is the month of Hamelech Basodeh. This is the month where the king is in the field. This is the month where the Melech Malchei Hamlachim, the Ribono Shel Olam himself, leaves the environs of the divine palace and literally comes to us. So if nothing else, just understand that Chodesh Elul is a month of incredible and unprecedented access to the Ribono Shel Olam, which means that in this month, there are things I could accomplish spiritually this month that you can't accomplish the rest of the year. And I want to point out something very interesting. You see, the way the Lubavitch Rebbe has it, he understands that this dynamic of Hamelech Basada is 40 days. Essentially, Rosh Chodesh Elul through Yom Kippur. The truth is, if you think about it experientially, it works beautifully for Chodesh Elul, doesn't really work well for Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur. Because remember again, Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur is Hamelech. Hamelech. And remember, we transform into everything. Avinu Malkeinu. So really, it almost feels as if the Yom Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, you have to make the journey to the king. You have to go before the king, right? But Rosh Hashanah, Kol Ba'ei Olam Ovrim Lefanav Ki B'nei Maron. And Rosh Hashanah, what happens? All of humanity passes before HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ki B'nei Maron, whatever B'nei Maron means, right? The classic example, like sheep before the shepherd. We go to God. So if Rosh Hashanah, if Yom Noraim is us going to God, then Elul is HaKadosh Baruch Hu coming to us. Hamelech Basada. The king comes to us. So if you just like let that rattle around your neshama a little bit, how incredible is that? You know, so often we go through life with this profoundly flawed conception of an angry God, of a God who's looking to punish, of a God who's looking to strike us down, of a God who's looking to get even when you step out of line. I remember very little from my formal education. My parents watched this year, so I probably shouldn't say that I spent a lot of money on my tuition. Right? But one thing I remember is I had an English literature course in high school, and I remember we did this whole section on like transcendentalism, and part of it was preachers during the transcendentalistic thing. And it was fascinating to read some of these sermons. And one of these sermons that we read was called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. So pretty much the title says it all. The title says it all, right? The drasha was essentially is if you sin, you are going to burn. And you're going to burn intensely and repeatedly and over. And you can't even imagine what God's wrath is like. And the truth is, the most incredible part of Yiddishkeit is, to be clear, there is punishment. There's absolutely punishment. Every sin has a punishment. Every avera has a repercussion. But the love that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for us is beyond comprehension. It's true, we're going to be judged. And it's true, we're going to be inscribed, hopefully all of us in the Sefer HaChaim. But at the end of the day, whatever book we're inscribed in it by a God who loves us. There is no entity in this world. Think about it for a moment. If a person has children, every parent knows how much you love your child. Well, as much as you love your child and you would do anything for your child, the Ribono Shel Olam loves us 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times more than that. It's a love that the human mind cannot comprehend. But that's the love that the Ribono Shel Olam has for us. And that's Elul. That's Elul. Elul, on a most basic level, is a time to take a step back and to say, Hashem loves me. Right? We often miss that point. Right? We're so focused sometimes on, and by the way, I want to point out, not Hashem loves me because I do mitzvos. Not Hashem loves me because I'm working on myself. Not Hashem loves me because He sees who I can become. Hashem loves me because He loves me. Because He loves me. Not because of anything I have done or will do, I have become or will become. The Ribono Shel Olam is probably the only true source of unconditional love in this world. You know, we like to think that parents love their children unconditionally. I know I have two daughters here, so I should say, of course, the two of you I do love unconditionally. We don't love our children unconditionally. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. You don't love your children unconditionally. There are absolutely things that your children could do that might not cause you to stop loving them, but will probably cause you to love them a little bit less or to love them a little bit differently. There's always will be an element of love, but that love could wax and wane. That's the nature of human emotion, nature of human relationships. There is only one source of unconditional and unchangeable love in this world, and that is the Ribono Shel Olam. And there is no month in which you could feel that love more than Chodesh Elul. So this is the month of intense love. This is the month of Hamelech Basada. This is the month the king is in the field, the king leaves the palace, and the king is more accessible to us than any other time. So of course, then the follow-up question becomes, so what should we do with it? So now that I know that it's a month of intense love, and Baruch Hashem, we're still at the beginning of Elul, we still have a lot of Elul in front of us, and there's that long Elul runway ahead of us. What should we do to maximize this month? So the Arizal, in number 4, says something very beautiful. The Arizal writes, Hanosin bayam derech merami zachodesh Elul. So the Arizal goes ahead. He quotes a pasuk from Yeshayahu. And the pasuk in Yeshayahu says, Ko amar Hashem, Hanosin bayam derech hamayim azim nesiva. So said Hashem, the Rabbi is describing the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who is HaKadosh Baruch Hu? He is the one who made a way in the sea. Hanosin bayam derech. So one of the descriptors of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is he makes a road, a pathway in the sea. So the Arizal says, what is Hanosim Avderech? What does it mean to plot a path in the sea? That's Elul. Elul, the Avold of Elul, is to plot a path in the sea. Very beautiful. Not exactly clear what that means. Let's analyze this a little bit. Take a look at number 6. We had this a couple of weeks ago in Parashas Re'eh. So one of the most incredible psukim in the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klal Yisrael, V'yata Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, what does Hashem ask of you? What does He ask of you? To revere Hashem, to walk in all of His ways, so to love Him, to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all of your heart and all of your soul. That's all HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What Moshe Rabbeinu was almost like, only thing HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks of you, the only thing He asks of you is to revere Him, is to love Him, is to walk in all of His ways, to love Him as we said, to serve Him with all of your heart and all of your soul. What's the obvious question on the pasuk? What's the obvious question?
It's a lot.
It's a lot, right? Well said. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu also makes it sound like, guys, I have like the deal of a century for you, right? Hashem asks so little of you, right? All He asks, again, is to revere Him, is to walk in all of His ways, to love Him with all of your heart, all of your soul. That's all. That's all. By the way, that one pasuk, you know what we call that? What do we call that one pasuk? That's Yiddishkeit, right? That's 613 mitzvahs. That's everything. So the Gemara is bothered by this. And the Gemara number 7, Maseches Bracha says, Atu, Yiras Shamayim Milsa Zutrasihi? Moshe Rabbeinu, you're minimizing the ask. Okay, you want to tell me, listen, Klal Yisrael, look at all that Hashem does for you, and then look what He asks of you in return. Okay, I could hear that. God definitely gives me a lot more than He asks me to give to Him. That's for sure. But Moshe Rabbeinu seems to be actively minimizing the ask. So literally when he says, what does Hashem ask of you? Kiyim liyira, just to revere Him. So the Gemara says, is cultivating a sense of divine reverence a small thing? That's a major thing. That's a major thing. So the Gemara says, famous Gemara number 8, Tam Rabbi Chanina, so in reality, the Gemara says, yes. What was Moshe Rabbeinu saying? And this is just an incredible idea just in and of itself. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying is, we as human beings, we spend so much time focusing, worrying, and obsessing on things that we don't control, to the point that we neglect to exert our sphere of influence on the things we do control. So the Gemara goes through, if you take a look at number 9, the Gemara says something so beautiful. The Gemara says, beautiful Gemara, there's a malach who is in charge of pregnancy. The malach's name is Laila. The Gemara says, and the Gemara seems to say over here, even the beginning of pregnancy, right? Before the tipa, before the droplet, before the fetus is even implanted. So what happens? The malach holding the little fetus comes before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, Ribono Shalom, what is this tipa? What is this drop going to become? Right? Gibar or chalash? Is the baby is this person going to be strong or weak? Chacham or tipesh? Wise or foolish? Ashir or ani? Poor or rich? The Gemara says, wow. And by the way, there's a lot more questions on it that I cut out of here as well. The Gemara says, but the most important question is missing. What's the most important question? What's the most important question? Tzaddik or Rasha? All right, rich or poor, wise or not wise, tall or short, handsome, okay, at the end of the day, what about tzaddik or Rasha? The Gemara says, no. Vilu Rasha o tzaddik lo ka'amar. The malach doesn't ask about whether or not this child is going to be a Rasha or tzaddik. Why not? Kid Rabbi Chanina, hakol bidei shamayim chutz mi yiras shamayim. Why? Because the Ribono Shalom controls if you're rich or poor. HaKadosh Baruch Hu describes if you're tall or short. Hashem will describe if you're strong or decide if you're strong or you're weak. Hashem makes all of those life decisions. All of those life decisions, those are not up to you. Now again, obviously, like for things like rich or poor, I have to put in my effort. But we all know people who put in very little effort and are very successful, and people who put in Herculean effort and struggle to make ends meet. So clearly, again, it's about your effort, but it's also about Baruch Hu has in charge of you. There's one thing that Hashem does not decide. One thing that God says, I'm hands off, it's not up to me. And what's that one thing? Your spiritual identity. Are you a tzaddik or are you a rasha? You cannot, no one else has control over that except you. And by the way, when we understand what it means that tzaddik or rasha, what that means is your spiritual identity, who you are, what your spiritual persona is, that is up to you and you alone. Now, are there influences that shape that? Of course, right? The parents you have, right? The family you grow up in, the schools you go to, the teachers, the friends, the marriage, all the different kinds of things, all of those are influencers. The Gemara says often we make a mistake. See, we outsource our success and we assume that I am the way I am because of, right? My parents were not good parents. My parents are wonderful parents. I'm giving it as an example, right? That in other words, that my parents didn't know how to raise me in the right way. My Rebbe wasn't good. There wasn't shalom bias. There wasn't this. And by the way, all legitimate things. Life is filled with all difficult things. At the end of the day, the buck of your life stops with you. Who you are, what you are. You're a tzaddik, you're a rasha. That is dependent on no one else but you. Other people can help shape influences. But first of all, whatever influences you choose to internalize, whatever influences you choose to act on, that's you and you alone. Even, listen to this, even the Ribono Shel Olam himself doesn't have a say in that. Isn't that incredible? So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have a say as to whether or not I'm a tzaddik or a rasha, then certainly my parents, my teachers, my friends, my family, my spouse, they could all have influences, but at the end of the day, it's up to me. It's up to me. So therefore, what the Gemara is saying is like this. Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klal Yisrael, you guys think you have all this stuff to worry about, all these things on your head, your parnasa and your health and your this and that, all these things. The reality is, the Ribono Shel Olam controls almost all of those things. I have to put in my effort, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu controls it. Moshe says, Klal Yisrael, there's only one thing that you control. The Ata Yisrael. What is the one thing that Hashem asks of you? To revere Him, to love Him, to follow in His ways, i.e., to become a spiritually righteous person. That's all. There's one job. I have to put in effort in a lot of other places, but the one job, the one thing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks of me is to try to be a righteous person, to try to lead a righteous life. That He doesn't micromanage, that no one else is in charge of but me. So Moshe, if you reframe Moshe Rabbeinu saying Klal Yisrael, and if you think about this, by the way, it's so profound. We spend so much time focusing on all the things we don't control, right? How much time do we spend on what other people think, right? What other people feel. You could spend from here until tomorrow what other people think, from here until next lifetime. You can't change what other people think. People are going to be nice, they're not going to be nice. That's not up to you, right? It's not up to you. There are so many different things. People worry about health. Again, we have to take whatever proper physical measures we can to preserve our health, to sustain our health. But at the end of the day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge of when we enter this world and when we leave this world. And so many different things. Parnasa, we have to put in our effort, but at the end of the day, some things go well and some things don't go well. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a master plan. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, we get so focused on the stuff that we don't control to the point that we neglect to actively take control over the things we do control. And in reality in life, there's really one thing you control: who you are. You do not control who your kids become. You do not control who your spouse becomes. You do not control who your friends become. There's only one thing in this world that you control, and that is you. Think about, by the way, just as an interesting exercise, how much time we spend blaming other people for the things that we did or didn't accomplish. Right? I think many of us, we have a whole list. I have a Rolodex of people who are at fault for why my life did not turn out the way I had planned it. I have an alphabetical order. I know I'm getting a lot of blank texts about the Rolodex. Okay, I got it. I guess you have to be above 40 to know what I'm talking about with the Rolodex. Right? So right, we have a whole list of people who are responsible for why my life didn't turn out the way I wanted it to turn out. Great. And where is that getting you? Where is that getting you? So fantastic. So now you have a whole list. Shkoyach, shkoyach. It's your mother, it's your brother, it's your father, it's your cousin, it's your neighbor, it's your friend, it's the rabbi. It's always the rabbi. It's always the rabbi, right? And it's everyone. Great, fantastic. So you've got the whole list now. You know exactly who is to blame because your life didn't turn out the way you wanted it. Feel any better?
No.
Feel any better, right? Did it help? It didn't help. You still feel terrible, still feel depressed, still feel underaccomplished. Whereas if a person says, I gotta own it, I'm not living the life I wanted, that's on me. Now, that is a bitter pill to swallow. But the moment you swallow it, you take back control over your life. You know, Rabbi Nachman says, if you believe that you have the ability to break something, then you have to believe that you have the ability to build it. So sometimes the moment you swallow that bitter pill and you say, okay, I messed up big time in life. It hurts. It hurts to own your failures. But the moment you own it, you've given yourself back the reins over your life. So I destroyed it. I broke it, whatever the it is. But if I broke it, I could also repair it. Maybe not repair it in the same way, right? The repaired item looks different than the original item. But if I broke it, I could repair it. So Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, Chevra, stop obsessing over all the stuff you don't control and focus on the one thing you do, which is you. Make the best you, because that's the only thing in this world that you really have control of. Rabbi Nachman takes this one step further. And this is really beautiful. And all of these concepts are tied together. Rabbi Nachman writes as follows. He says, number 10, in the Kuti Halachas, he reads it a little bit differently. He reads it as, V'ata Yisrael, Ma Hashem Elokecha. He says, Rak bebechinas, source number 10, Rak bebechinas v'ata, bechinas hayom mikol tishmu, shelo yachshov ela osasha v'arega shehu ba'ata. So watch this. So now, let's look at this all as a progression, right? So I internalize Moshe Rabbeinu's words. I got it. I own me, right? I'm taking back the reins of my life. I broke a lot of stuff in me, but now that I acknowledge that I broke it, I'm owning it, now I'm going to fix it. Now, generally, what happens after that? So now I'm all pumped, I'm all psyched, I'm going to make the best life. And then what usually happens in that moment right afterwards?
Nothing.
Fear and paralysis. Like, oh my God, what do I do now? Now, I got the reins. And now again, so like, now what? Where do I start? What should I do? If I look at all the things that I have to repair in my life, it's a laundry list. It's a laundry list. And the truth is, even if I started today, maybe worked for the rest of my life, I don't even know that I can get everything done. So sometimes, again, I feel so good that I took back the reins. I feel so good that I recognize the buck of my life stops with me. I'm going to own it. I'm going to fix it. And then I get overwhelmed. Where do I start? And comes Moshe Rabbeinu, comes Rabbi Nachman, and says it's very simple. Go back to number 6 for just a moment. Back to source number 6. Look how Rabbi Nachman reads this pasuk. Rabbi Nachman reads it as follows. He says, V'ata kama Yisrael ma Hashem Elokecha shleimach. Klal Yisrael. Do you know what Hashem asks of you? Hashem asks of you one thing. Ata. Maximize the present moment. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not ask you for guarantees about the future because you can't guarantee the future. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not ask you to make long-term commitments because the truth is none of us are really capable. Well, we can make long-term commitments, but you have no idea if you can honor your long-term commitments. So Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klal Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks one thing of you. Ma Hashem Elokecha shalom imach. What does Hashem ask of you? V'ata. Just take the moment in front of you and maximize it. So often in life, we get carried away with like long-term plans, right? Long-term plans. There are plenty of people who walk through life with fantastic long-term plans. You know, people become expert planners. I know exactly what I'm going to do in a year from now, in 5 years from now. I've got my whole life mapped out. And people become career life planners to the point that they're fantastic planners. Only one little detail, which is they never actually do anything. Because we're so busy planning for the future that we forget that, first of all, that future is going to change 100 times between now and then. But more than that, you can't control it. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, the good news is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not ask you for any assurances about your future. What does Hashem ask you for? V'ata. Right now, are you the best you? Right now, are you living your best life? Right now, are you a trusted servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Right now, are you cultivating a meaningful spiritual identity? I'm not asking about what happened yesterday, and so I'm asking about what's happening tomorrow. Va'ata Yisrael. Just focus on the maximization of the present moment. That, says Rabbi Nachman, and if you bring these together, then suddenly, again, this becomes an overwhelming life lesson. That Moshe Rabbeinu, I understand also, Moshe Rabbeinu was giving all of this over in the Transjordanian lands, right? In the Transjordanian lands. Remember, again, Rahman al-Islam, there was the terror attack in Eretz Yisrael on Sunday, or on Sunday, where 3 precious neshamas were killed by the Allenby Bridge. So if you ever drive that road, that's Route 90. That's the Jordan Valley Road, right? If you drive out of Yerushalayim, you drive to the end of Route 90. If you go right, you go to Ein Gedi, Masada, keep going to Eilat. You go left, that's the Jordan Valley Road. So the truth is, right before the Allenby Bridge, a little bit before, there's a site called Ras Al Yahud. If you ever gone there, Ras Al Yahud, it's a big place. They say like it's the baptismal site for the Christians. But they also believe that historically, that's the area where Yoshua and Klal Yisrael crossed the Yarden. They crossed the Jordan River there. In fact, if you're looking at the Jordan River, if you turn right back around, you see Yericho. Yericho is right behind you. So actually, according to many poskim, you're allowed to make a bracha, and we made a bracha there. Baruch sha'asa lavosinu nes b'makom hazeh. That you can make a bracha. Thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for performing a miracle for our ancestors in this place. So just understand, that's the spot where Moshe Rabbeinu is giving this whole drasha. So he's not crossing the Jordan with them, right? He's not crossing with them, but he's preparing them to lead impactful and meaningful lives. So what does he tell them? He says, Chevra. Number one, stop obsessing over the stuff you don't control and exert your influence over the stuff you do control. And there's really only one thing in this world you control, which is the kind of person you are going to be. The spiritual identity you are going to create. Everything else you have to put in effort, but you don't control the outcome. The one outcome you control is who and what you are going to be. And how do you do that? To which Rabbi Nachman adds on, Vi'ata, maximize the moment. Don't worry about tomorrow, don't worry about long-term planning, right? But focus on the maximization of your life, of your spiritual opportunities, the actualization of your spiritual identity in this moment. One more piece, I'm going to bring it all together. Remember again what the Arizal said about what's Elul? Remember in number 4, the Arizal said, Hanosim bayam derech, right? The Arizal said that Elul is this pathway in the water. So I'll show you something interesting. Take a look at number 11. Torah says, the halachos of eating kosher fish, right? So what makes a fish kosher? Fins and scales. Good. That was an easy one for you, right? Good. So, right, fins and scales. The Gemara in Masechus Chulin has a fascinating discussion. The Gemara says, Yesh lo achshav v'asid lahashir b'shash l'minamayim. Let's say you have a fish that has its scales when it's in the water. But the moment you take it out of the water, the scales fall off. There is a type of fish like this. I can't remember the name of the fish. I keep wanting to say kingfish, but I don't know that that's the type of fish. In any event, let's say the fish has the scales while it's in the water, but the moment you take it out of the water, the scales fall off. Is that a kosher fish or not? The Gemara says, Harezeh mutter. It works. What does that mean? See, as long as the fish has the scales while it's in the water, is kosher, meaning what? That we don't look at what the fish is going to be once you take it out of the water. And we don't look at what the fish is going to be once you put it on the table. And we don't look at what the fish is going to look like when it's in the net. We look at what the fish is in that moment, in that present moment, when it's in the water. And if it has its scales when it's in the water, kosher. The Arizal says, what's Chodesh Elul? Chodesh Elul is hanosein baderech, bayam derech, placing a road in the sea. Elul is like being a fish. And all I need to do is make sure that I have my fins and scales right now. But what's going to happen after Elul? Right? We know this story a little bit, right? We know how this works. We've been around the block a couple of times. What happens, Elul? Okay, this is it. This is the year, right? This is my breakout year, right? This is where I'm going to turn the corner. And then I ramp up, and Rosh Hashanah, incredible. Yom Kippur, Aseret Yemei Tshuva, fantastic. And then Sukkot, Gan Eden, Hoshana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, incredible. And then again, the week after Sukkot, I'm still like the Kohen Gadol and Kohen Hashem. It's fantastic, it's great. And then what happens? like the second Tuesday after Yom Tov, right? So life is exactly back to where it was, sometimes even worse. Sometimes even worse. And for a lot of us, that's been the story of our lives for decades. For decades. So sometimes I come to Chodesh Elul and I already have like a little bit of a defeated attitude. Like, I've seen this show. I've seen this show. I've watched this show so many times. I know the exciting parts. I know the inspired parts. I know the peaks, I know the valleys. But here's I know how it ends. And it always ends the same way. That it's the middle of Elul. I'm nervous that another year went by. I didn't do what I wanted to do, and I'm right back. So I'll start the cycle again. And so after a little while, you begin to feel defeated. But here's the beauty of Elul. The beauty of Elul is that Elul is like being a fish in water. And it doesn't really matter what happened before. And it doesn't really matter what happens once you have to leave the water. You know what's interesting about Hanosein Bayam Derech? You know what's interesting about, if you ever go on a boat, right? So what happens? The boat goes through the waters. And then what happens when the boat goes through the waters? What happens? Waves. You create waves. 10 minutes after the boat has been there, what do you see in the water? Nothing. There's no trace of it anymore, right? No one will ever know that there was ever a boat that went there. Elul's a lot like that as well. Elul is not about what you're gonna do in the future. And it's not about what you have done in your past. See, this is why Elul is not part of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's not. Elul is not about Ashamnu Baganu. It's not about apologizing for our sins. Elul is not about tshuva. Elul is not about tshuva. You know what Elul is like? Elul is like being a fish in the water with your fins and your scales. Right now, I'm kosher. Let me do something right now. Let me just do something now. But one second. How can you take something on you don't know if you're going to be able to sustain it? You're right. The truth is, nothing you take on can you ever know that you could sustain. But it's so hypocritical to take something on and then the next week, it's not hypocritical. You know what it's called? It's not being hypocritical. It's called being human. Being human means to succeed and then to fail repeatedly and keep repeating that cycle over and over and over until you're dead. That's what being human means. No one ever perfects it, right? You ever meet a person who says, you know what? I can't believe it. I finally stopped struggling. It's incredible. Just happened last week, right? I was out and I realized, oh my gosh, this is great. I have no struggles, no temptations, no ups, no downs. For me, smooth sailing in everything. Ever meet a person like that? No. You can meet them, but if you're meeting them, you're probably at their levaya. That's probably what it means, right? Because there is no person like that in the world. So it's natural. But Elul is not about what you're going to do and what you have been doing. Elul is just about, we're here now. The king is in the field. The king is in the field. So what are you going to do? How are you going to take advantage of it? What do you want to do with your life? What transformative activity do you want to engage in? And by the way, transformative doesn't have to mean something big. Transformative means something that's just going to have a positive effect on me. You're going to sustain it. You're not going to sustain it. To be honest, who cares? Who cares? Elul is not about what's going to happen in the future, because a lot of times you come out of the water of Elul. What happens the moment I come out of the water of Elul? What happens? All of my scales fall off. Suddenly I'm not kosher anymore. But that's okay. That's not what Elul is about. Elul is just about living in the moment. Elul is just about va'ata. Elul is the king is here. The access is here. The closeness is available to us. Do something to take advantage. But there's one last caveat, and with this we're going to conclude. In Tzidkas, we're learning in the morning Tzidkas Azadik, Reb Tzadok, and we did a piece by Reb Tzadok, a very beautiful piece. Reb Tzadok points out the first mitzvah that Klal Yisrael did was Karban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb. The Paschal Lamb. And interestingly enough, there are a whole variety of differences, a whole number of distinctions between the first Pesach, what we call, Pesach Mitzrayim, and Pesach Doros. Pesach will be performed in the future. One of the most interesting distinctions Reb Tzadok points out is that Pesach Mitzrayim was consumed b'chipazon, with haste. Right? It's interesting, right? The way that our ancestors ate the Paschal Lamb in Egypt was they had to have their shoes on, right? Their walking stick. They were ready to go. Very different, right? In the future, we don't have Karban Pesach yet. We'll have it in by this Pesach halavai, right? But remember, you sit down at the table, you relax. The Tzaddik says, why was the first Pesach b'chipazon? Why did it have to be in haste? The Tzaddik says, because in life, if you want to make change, the moment that desire for some level of change comes up inside of you, you have to act on it now. Now. You see, if you think about change too much, what ends up happening? You don't do anything. See, the way the Yetzer Hara works, Mr. Shem writes about this as well. The way the Yetzer Hara works is, the Yetzer Hara, the Ramchal writes, that the primary tool of the Yetzer Hara is distraction. The Yetzer Hara doesn't have to get me to sin. Like, people think the Yetzer Hara is there to get me to sin. He doesn't need to get me to sin. What does he need me to do? Get distracted. Just get distracted. And get distracted for long enough, and guess what? You forget about what you were even doing, right? And again, we live in a world filled with distractions. This is not a technology schmooze, right? Technology has many wonderful benefits, but I think we'd all acknowledge that our attention spans are severely diminished, right? And for whatever the reason, we can't go more than a couple of minutes without being distracted by something on a device. It's just, and by the way, kosher phone, not kosher phone, we should all acknowledge everybody's distracted. Everybody's distracted, right? Even if it's just staring at a device, somehow, I don't know, grabs us. But everybody's distracted. That is the primary tool of the Yetzer Hara. Distract a person enough, and they won't get around to doing what they were thinking about doing. That's what Tzaddik says. If you decide you want to do something different, whatever it is, your thing for Elul, do it now. Do it now. Because if you wait, it has to be chipazon. If you wait, it's not going to happen. So if we bring this all together, it turns out that the power and profundity of Chodesh Elul is that it's not the beginning of the Yamim Noraim. It's not. It's not the beginning of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's a totally different experience. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is us going to the palace. Elul is HaMelech Basad, the king comes to us. And the king says, no, let's spend some time together. Let's just enjoy each other's company. Let's get to know each other again. Let's maximize this month that we have together. How do we maximize the month? Number one, Moshe Rabbeinu tells us, is stop worrying about the things or obsessing about the things you don't control and focus on the one thing you really do control, which is you. Who you are, what you are, your spiritual identity. How do I do that? Rabbi Nachman comes along and says, Vi'ata, maximize your moment. Here is the power of Chodesh Elul. The Arizal tells us, Elul is Hanosam Bayam Derech. It's the pathway through the water. Why the water? Why is water Elul? Because we are like fish in the water of Elul. What happens if the fish comes out and the scales fall off? It's still kosher, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Elul is just swimming around happily in the sea of spirituality, knowing that I've done something to get my fins and scales back. Are you going to hold on to them? You're going to retain them? You're going to perpetuate it? Say it with a smile. I have no idea. And a bigger smile? Probably not. This is probably just my Elul phase, right? But it's okay. It's okay to have an Elul phase. It's okay to live it up spiritually 1 month, even though you know deep down you're probably not going to be able to keep it. It's okay. It's so fake. It's not fake. It's being human. It's taking the opportunity, right? Can you imagine for a moment that, let's say again, you have a family gathering, you have all of your family together. Family never gets together. Some families purposely never get together. You have a family that likes each other, so everybody gets together, right? They're happy to see each other. So you can imagine someone says, you know what? I'm sorry, I'm not spending time with any of you because in 3 hours you're all going to leave. So since you're all going to leave anyway, and we're not going to be able to perpetuate this, it doesn't make any sense to enjoy each other's company for the next 3 hours. I would say that's ridiculous. Maximize. But yet we do that with spirituality all the time. No, I'm not going to do this. I know I can. I'm not sure. I don't know if I could keep it up. So what? So because you can't keep it up, you shouldn't enjoy it while you can? Because you don't know if you could keep up a davening with kavanah, you shouldn't even try it? Because I don't know if I could be a ba'alas chesed, building chesed into my day every single day, I shouldn't even try and fill in the blanks, whatever it is. We do this to ourselves all the time. We think that somehow it's hypocritical to do something that you can't guarantee you're going to keep up. Well, if you're only going to do things that you could guarantee you could keep up, you're going to do nothing because you can guarantee absolutely nothing. The power of Chodesh Elul is being like the fish in the sea with its beautiful fins and scales. Right now, I'm kosher. Right now, I'm beautiful. Right now, I'm holy. Right now, the king is in the field. and I am going to maximize the experience. But the caveat Reb Tzadok tells us is, ladies, I have to choose something tonight. Can't say, oh, that was so interesting, I'm going to sleep on it and decide. No, it doesn't work that way. If you sleep on it, then ultimately by tomorrow morning, it's old news, right? By tomorrow morning, you're going to have already like 30 WhatsApp messages, 42 emails, 17 texts, and 19 voicemails, right? So in other words, there's not going to be any time. If you want this, if you want Chodesh Elul, if you want the Melech Basada, tonight. And by the way, it's not tonight plan your Chodesh Elul. It's tonight. What am I doing? So what am I doing? King's in the field. What do I want to do with the king? Right? How do I want to spend time with the king? What beautiful thing do I want to take upon myself in order to do? Okay, you're going to do it for a day, for 2 days, for 3 days. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. But you have to make your decision tonight. You have to make your decision b'chipazon. Because if you don't do it with haste, we get distracted. And once we're distracted, it is so hard, we all know, to regain focus. This is the power of Chodesh Elul. We should be zocheh Amiras Hashem to spend a beautiful month with the King. We should be zocheh to feel the love of the Ribbon Shalom, how much He must love us, to leave Shamayim, to come down to this earth, to literally walk amongst us, to be with us, just to want to be with us, and how much all He wants is for us to want to be with Him. He never asks for perfection. He never asks for consistency. He never asks for guarantees. He just asks for va'ata, to do something to maximize the present moment. May we be zocheh Amiras Hashem, to be like that fish with the scales and the fins. Whatever will happen, will happen. But at least we know that during this Chodesh Elul, we'll make something great of ourselves. Have a wonderful evening. Yeah.